Okay. 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 And do you see, can you see all the screen presentation?
Yes, but if you can, you have down something that you can make it wider,
Okay.
bigger.
Okay. 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 Now it's better, I think so.
Yes.
Okay, fine. First of all, I would like to thank Leah for your very kind invitation. I try to take part in all our appointment, but it's difficult, you know, because I am very busy, but I try to do it.
And thank you for being a member of the Poland Forum.
Okay, thanks a lot. Today, I would like to say a little bit about my new book. The title this book in Polish is Odpamiętywanie polsko-żydowskie, but in English, I translate it as Polish-Jewish ReRemembering. The book was published in 2021 in Lublin, in Poland, at my university. And now I'm working on the translation this book into English, and it will be published 2023 in Boston in Academic Studies Press. I would like to begin from the what is ReRemembering, because it is very important to understand this word. ReRemembering, this is Polish-Jewish ReRemembering, refers to the post-1989 30-year-long process of reviving attention to Polish-Jewish relations in historical, cultural, and literary studies, including the impact of Polish Jews on the development of Polish culture, their presence in Polish social life, and the relationships between Jewish and non-Jewish Poles. Okay. The book, in book, you can see what is in process of ReRemembering in this monograph. That's first of all, this is the monograph about the relationship between Poles and Jews in the Middle War time, 1918-1939, and the first part of the books says about this between Arya and Golus on Polish Jewish and Polish Jewish literature. The second item is Fortunes of Polish Jewish writer in post-war Poland, and this is on the example of Arnold Słucki, 4 Sides of Time Literary Travels of Arnold Słucki. The third is Israel as a place of development of Polish literature writing by Jews, 1948-2018. The title of this part is To Lands and to Skies, Polish-Israeli Literary Images. And the fourth one is Holocaust in the Recently Polish Literature after 2000. It is a very important part of my books because I'm working on this topic during last few years. Now I am the head of Polish-Israeli Belgic research team, and we are working on the project which about Leah said, in the textual word of the Shoah on the latest Polish literature. In the first section of the monograph, is a voyage into Polish Jewish literary world with its complicated Polish Jewish and Christian Jewish relationships. I began from the very famous and very important for me, not only for me, place, I think about Lublin. And the first, the chapter 1 is Magen Lublin, Arnsteinowa and Czechowicz. This is a completely new exploration of the volume of poetry Stare Kamienie, Old Stones, by Franciszka Arnsteinowa and Józef Czechowicz, which was a joint work of two pre-war writers and a poetic outlook on the Polish Jewish city of Lublin. In this collaborative work, the poets exchange cultural roles. Czechowicz, as a Pole, provided a poetic outlook on the Jewish city of Lublin, and Arnsteinowa, as a Jew, on the Christian area. It is really very interesting point of view on Lublin city and Lublin district. And you can see on this slide the thematic correspondence principle between the part of this book of Stare Kamienie, and I was looking for the correspondence principle between authors. On the left hand side, you can see author, C, in CZ is Czechowicz, A is Arnsteinowa. There are 15 parts in this book, and there is a correspondence between first and 15, second and third, etc. You can see this on this slate. And in the middle is the poem Na Olejnej, on Olejna Street. The poem is analyzed and interpreted by means of the text numeric instruments of Jewish and Christian mysticism from a cultural hermeneutic point of view. And you can see on this slide the three main Kabbalistic hermeneutics. This is Masora, Gematria, and Notarikon. This Stare Kamienie, in my interpretation, corresponds with book Rabbi David ben Salomon ibn Abin Zimra, Magen David, and this book was published in Amsterdam in 1713. Finding a poetic algorithm which allows for a new interpretation, but also for discovery of the Christian Jewish cultural meaning of this text, Lublin is a starting point in a voyage into the Polish Jewish literary world. The chapter 2 is the Shadow of Jewish Lublin in Polish poetry. In this chapter, I discuss Polish poets after the Holocaust who searched for Jewish traces in Lublin and attempted to describe them in their poetry. The former Lublin citizens, the former Jewish Lublin citizens are still alive in the memory of Lublin's inhabitants. Many places are signaled by their former presence and historic activities. But in the analyzed poems, Lublin does not only consist of traces of Jewish life, but also, of course, of their annihilation. The pictures of Jewish Lublin and the experience of the Shoah appear in the poem of Jerzy Łobodowski, Ewa Szelburg-Zarębina, Alfred Wierzbicki, and Julia Hartwig. You can see my translation of her poem, Lublin Elegy. Christian-Jewish relationship, Shalom Esch's The Witch of Castile, is an observation of Christian-Jewish relationship in the novel of one of the most acclaimed Yiddish language writer, Shalom Ash, the novel setting in Rome in the Middle Ages under Pope Paul IV. Jewish persecutions and their martyrdom took place during his pontificate. Is only a pretext for a search for links between historical anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism and the hostility attitudes of many Christians towards Jews in Poland. In this chapter, one can find observations about these attitudes in the context of contemporary Christian and Jewish statements on dialogue. And the next four chapters are about Polish Jewish writers. What is Polish Jewish literature? Who are Polish Jewish writers? And in this kind of study, you can find three main criteria of classification of Polish Jewish writers in the context of their output. The first one is thematic criterion. The author writes in Polish, but the subject of her text is the Jewish world. The second criteria is biographical criterion. Authors define themselves as Jews and manifest their link with the Jewish culture. The Polish Jewish writing has the multilingual character of the literary output and bilingualism, Polish, Hebrew, Yiddish, or even trilingualism, Polish, Hebrew, and Yiddish. On the left-hand side, you can see the picture of Jan Czyński. It was the first Polish Jewish writer, and he was very active during the November uprising, 1831 in Lublin. And the third criterion is Judaic topics occurrences criterion, the frequency of Judaic topics from Tanakh, Talmud, and Kabbalah found in their poets' works. All of these usually function together. What was the language situation of Jewish writers in Poland before the Second World War? About this situation, Roman Brandstätter, very famous Polish Jewish writer, wrote, and he defined Jewish literature as all literary output in Hebrew, Yiddish, and Polish, which was created by Jews who did not lose connections with Jewry in national, social, and cultural sense, but for whose problem of Jewish culture was fundament of the worldview and artistic concessions. It is very interesting to see the same words about the Polish Jewish literature said Chaim Low, who said that it is very interesting. It was a few years before the Second World War that he said, there are 3 Jewish languages. And the first one is Polish, the second is Yiddish, and the third one is Hebrew. And what was the situation of Jews in poetry of reborn Poland? About it, Chaim Low said that some of Polish Jewish writers admit to Jewish root, the other pass it modestly over. That is why the author of such work as me has many difficulties. And I really, believe me, I really feel it, that there are a lot of difficulties in this area when I research it. Should he write only about these who do not shame their ancestry, or only about these whose Jewry had left an imprint of their literary output? If Słonimski should be passed over because he was born as Christian, how to skip him? So in time of despair and came down, he confessed that he had not filled Paul. And maybe, to use the principle of German theologians, of racial purity, if to draw hidden writers out, those who had given themselves pseudonym. Of course, and you can find really many, more than 100 Polish Jewish writers. You can see it on this picture, on this slide, from Adolf Rudnicki to Rachel Auerbach. For me, very important sources of poetry is Polish Jewish press, and on this slide you can see the main dailies. Chwila from Lwów, Nowy Dziennik from Kraków, and Nasz Przegląd, our review from Warsaw. And of course, the books from the cycle of Polish Jewish writers are very, very important in this book and in my research. Summarized, there are 4 chapters on Polish Jewish literature of interwar period. This is Polish Jews in the army of the Second Republic, on the example of Profile i drobiazgi żołnierskie by Adolf Rudnicki, the languages of Polish Jewry, Polish Jewish poets, linguistic dilemma. I try to analyze 3 very important poems about the problem of languages. The mystical Eastern borderlands in Polish Jewish poetry, and Polish poetry in the context of Jewish child. The second part of the book was titled 4 Sides of Time, Literary Travels of Arnold Słudzki. Arnold Słudzki was a very important Polish Jewish poet, writing in Yiddish and before the Second World War and after in Polish. He was very active after Holocaust, and he's a very good example of difficult fate of Jewish artists in Poland after the Second World War. The following 4 chapters in this part show his relationship and that of many other writers from the cycle who survived the Shoah to Poland, Russia, Germany, and Israel, signs of which we are visible in the literary order. This is the picture of Arnold Słudzki. And Arnold Słudzki, the first place of his poetics observation is Warsaw. In Arnold Słudzki output, the capital of Poland stakes out an important place. It appears in all periods of his literary activity. And all the poems devoted to Warsaw are full of love, affection, and nostalgia. For him, a Polish Jew and Polish writer, Warsaw was an axis mundi and a sacred place, the artistic and life affecting fascination. The second place, very important for him, was Russia, and 2 Faces of Russia is the next part of poetic activity. Was Russia an ideological creation, a communist hope of humanity? This is the first part of this chapter. And the second part, in his later mature poetic activity, Russia, first of all, its Asiatic half, was a pre-cradle of civilization and myth, which played a significant role for the creations of literature from Western and Eastern Europe. Russia is all of these poets' work was an important point of reference. And Germany, chapter 10, Idol and Idols Interpretation, is an analysis of two poems by Arnold Słudzki, written in Israel and Germany. The most important context for his poetic view are anthropology and theology of Judaism. In Słudzki poetry, a human being is perpetually placed in a situation of making a choice between two kinds of axiology. The first, revealed by God; the second, a consequence of idolatry, in other words, the favoring of idols. And the last chapter, which is devoted to Słudzki, is a Polish columnist in Israel. Arnold Słudzki is writing as a columnist in the Polish daily Nowiny Kurier. This daily was published in Israel. He primarily expressed himself on topics related to literature written in Hebrew, Yiddish, and Polish, and also commented on current political events. The third part, Two Lands and Two Skies, Polish-Israeli Literary Images, is devoted to the last stop of Polish Jewry writing in Polish, Israel. And when I visited in Israel in 1998, I met with Richard Louw. He was a Polish editor of Kontury. It was almanac on literature in Polish in Israel, and he told very interesting thing during this meeting. I would like to read it. He said, and I published this interview in Tygiel Kultury in Łódź. Editing Kontury, Polish almanac in Israel, I put the authors up to publishing texts related primarily to their arrival in Israel, acclimatization in their new homeland, how they began to work, how they learned Hebrew, how it all was going on. However, it is very difficult for me to obtain such texts. There are psychological barriers that these people cannot overcome. Most often, it happens that they start to talk about how they came to Israel, and after 3 sentences, they return to Poland, they return to the occupation Poland, they return to the Shoah. On the next chapter is about Poland and Poles in the poetry of Israel-based authors writing in Polish. This is first of all Irit Amiel. I would like to show the 2 very beautiful poems, and we can say that this kind of relationship to Poland is based on the we can call it as a sentiment area and resentment area. In the next chapter, The Double Messiah, Leo Lipsky Piotruś, I give a new interpretation of the novel Piotruś by Leo Lipsky, who was a soldier in General Anders' army. During his stay in Palestine, 1943-1944, was stricken by paralysis. In Israel, he spent next more than 50 years with a chronic terminal illness. His greatest literary work was his novel Piotruś, to which Lipsky gave the subtitle Apocrypha. The novel is a story about a man, a Holocaust survivor, who was sold in the Jaffa market. Only one customer, an old woman, wanted to buy him to take up space for her in the toilet in the post-war multifamily building where she lives in Tel Aviv. He spends all days in this place, suffering greatly, until he is rescued from this situation by his savior, a prostitute named Batya. Lipsky's novel is a work about two messiahs, one Christian, one Jewish, creations of both a male messiah Piotruś and a female messiah Batya. Ultimately, this is a story about God and humanity after Shoah and hidden values which are difficult to interpret. The 14th chapter is Poetry and Judaism, Anna Freilich Israeli poems. Anna Freilich is a very famous Polish writer. She lives in New York. Anna Freilich visited Eretz Israel in 1991, and after this visit, she wrote Israeli poems. It is the cycle contains 7 separately titled parts, which differ thematically, stylistically, and generically from one another, ranging from a poetic image to a lyrical joke. The order of the poems signals the fundamental role played by the topographic and the geographic dimensions of this poetry, which in this way become a diary of travel from south to the north in the context of both place and time. The next chapter, Literary Criticism in the Israeli daily Noviny Courier after 1968, it is about Noviny Courier, which was a periodical that appeared in Polish in Israel from November 1958 to July 2009. And it was very important Polish cultural institution. In this chapter, I analyze the critical text of 4 authors whose works were published in Noviny Courier, Henryk Dankowicz, Arnold Słudzki, Filip Istner, and Nathan Gross. The last part of my book is undertitled In the Textual Word of the Shoah on the Latest Polish Literature. And this part is connected with my research on Polish literature, newest literature after 2000. And first of all, we must remember that in 2000, there was published very important book under the title Neighbors by Jan Tomasz Gross. And this book was very important because it, thanks to this book, began very important discussion in Polish society about the Holocaust and about the role of Polish people in this experience. And we can say that after this discussion, I think that since 2001, 2002, more than 200 new titles were published, the books which were linked to the Shoah. You can see some covers of them. And in the 16th chapter, I try to discuss the, according to me, the very important new topos in Polish literature. This is anti-Semitism, of course, neo-Nazis, the devaluation of the values, second, third generation, place after Aryan site, place after ghetto, place after lager, Muranów pogrom, Right House, Shoah trauma, the battle for memory, and the Jewish corpses, Jewish zombie. This is the motive which is very active in Polish, newest Polish literature. And I used in this part of the book three new words. The first one is reconstruction, and I write about the memorial reconstruction, about anthropological reconstruction, and about topoi reconstruction. And the example of book The Boarding House by Piotr Paziński, the original title of this book in Polish is Pensjonat. The second term is transfigurations, and I said about the process, very interesting process in which the authors write about Holocaust, but not in the Holocaust time, but they transformation, they use transformation of this time to the past or to the future. And the good example of this activity is output of Piotr Szewc. And the third term is subversion. It is a very, very active kind of literary tactic in Polish literature. You can see it, for instance, in this book Żydówek nie obsługujemy, we don't serve Jewish Woman by Mariusz Sieniewicz. And first of all, I hope that I don't pass the time. It is 20 minutes. Thank you for your attention, and I would like once again to say that my book will be translated into English, and you will have occasion to know all this book, not only my lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for a very interesting lecture. And really, I heard the lecture once, but in the second time, it's more interesting. You know, I'm very curious about many subjects you mentioned here. And I would like to open our forum for questions and discussion. Please, the floor is yours. Questions, comments. Rivka, you are on mute. You are on mute.
May I have a short question?
Yes. Yes, please.
It's very interesting when you told that about this meeting with Richard Lev, and I would like to ask you to explain what was this difficulty about speaking about experience of Polish Jews in Israel, and this constant returning to the homeland, in the meaning of place where they were born and experienced trauma. So why this? Is it a lack of cultural participation? Is it a language? Is it maybe because of trauma? So what's your explanation? Thank you.
I would like to say about it that when I visited the first time Israel in 1998, I met with many writers, because during this time I worked on the dictionary Polish literature in Israel. I pressed it in 2011 or 12, I don't remember. But I remember very well the meeting with Łucja Glicksman, Łucja Pinczewska-Glicksman. This woman was very interesting and very original. He was Polish writer, but he never visited Poland since 1939. But all the time, she used Polish language. It was very amazing for me when I visited her and I interviewed her. When somebody called to her, all the time she began his conversation, słucham, and after it, she changed the language because nobody called to her in Polish, rather in Hebrew or in English, but not in Polish. But of course, there are a lot of problems for these people. I knew many of them. And we can see, I wrote about it in my book, that they look at Poland in two ways. One way is the way of sentiment. They talked about Poland. It is the place of their life, their childhood, etc. And it is a very important place. They are very good at Polish. Łucja Pinczewska-Glicksman, for instance, told me the story that when she was very young, before the Second World War, she was the best at Polish in her class in Poland, in Kalisz. And she told me that once upon a time, her teacher took her in the middle of the class and said to her colleagues, to her Polish colleagues, "Be ashamed. A Jewish girl is the best at Polish language in this class. Be ashamed." And it was really horrible, but for them, Poland is this area of sentiment. And of course, this is an area of resentment, and this resentment is built on the relationship of many Polish people to them before the Second World War, and they remembered also very well the time of 1968 or 1957. It was a very difficult time for Jewish people. And what is interesting that I could see during this time that they really loved Poland. It was so amazing for me because they said about Poland as a mystical land. And that's what's a pity that they couldn't live in this place. But I could say that the situation was and is very, very complicated.
May I still say something? Yeah, you didn't speak about the problem of language and culture. I don't know, probably I'm one with, or maybe only, who lives a lot of years who is from Poland and lives so many years in Israel. And I must say that this language barrier and cultural barrier is very strong. I mean, of course, you can speak Hebrew, you can learn it quickly, but in order to write literature, sometimes it's impossible. Of course, there were many writers from pre-war Poland, like let's say Nathan Alterman and others, but they studied in Hebrew language schools like Tarbut, etc. And they had this mastery of Hebrew. Otherwise, it's quite difficult. So I suppose that part of this explanation may be this problem of the language too. Thank you.
Yes. I can agree with you, Witold, that this is the problem of language. But you must remember that these people in Israel tried to build their cycle of company. For instance, they tried to meet only with people who talked to Polish, and until 90s, the cycle of Jewish Polish people in Israel are rather active people, and of course they had many problems with language, but they try to live in their cycle and to live in this way in Israel.
I know it's very interesting talk. I met a number of American Polish Jews who left Poland in 1968 when they were forced to leave. They were at university, so of course their Polish was very good by then. What's interesting, I interviewed them in New York, and of course their first language now is English. But I noticed they were all reading Polish novels, books in Polish. And I said to them, it's interesting you're still reading books in Polish. And they said, Polish is a clearer language to understand. It wasn't about not understanding English. It was about the way in which Polish, because I don't speak Polish, Polish works as a language, that they found it more satisfying to read in Polish. So I just think that's another aspect to it, not just about their ability to read and write Hebrew, but actually maybe the way Polish works as a language.
Yeah, you are right, of course, and we can see that the Polish. There is a problem with a very good Polish writers in Israel who are very famous in all over the world. I think, for instance, about Iri Tamiel or Ida Fink, but they are only a little known in Israel. And for instance, I met with many people in Israel and talked about Polish literature, and for me it was amazing that many people knew nothing about Iri Tamiel, who was so very known in Europe and in the United States, but he lived in Israel.
Lea, you are on the mute.
I would like to add, yes, I would like to add something about immigrants that came from Poland and the difficulties in integration. My parents came from Poland in 1957. I was born in Israel some years after, but they spoke at home and they acted like they live in Poland. Even they made a lot of effort to learn the Polish language, but I can tell you that even after so many years that they lived in Israel, until my father, the day he died, he was a Polski pan. He was wearing the same clothes, even in Israel. It's so hot, and 35 degrees in summer. He's going with the cravat and with the chapka, with the hat, and he acted, all the daily life in our house was like they lived in Poland. It was so difficult for them to get used to the life in Israel, the daily life, even in food, in clothes, and the Nash Przegląd. It was the paper that they read at home. They read Polish. They spoke Polish between them and family members and friends. And Hebrew was therefore very difficult for them. They did not speak Hebrew well. After, I think they came in 1957. My mother died in 1994. My father in 2001. So many years, they did not speak good Hebrew. So Poland was so strong in their hearts. They read books in Polish. There was a library. They went to the library, and everything that was connected to Poland reminded them home. I think that there is a big difference between Jews that came to Israel in waves. Those Jews who came immediately after the war in 1948, in 1950, then the waves we have a little bit in 1952, then you have 1957, and of course the most different group is 1968, which Hannah, her parents came in 1968, and she as a child, their first language was Polish. They spoke with her only Polish. Yes, Hannah? Hannah, open the mute. Hannah.
Yes, you're right.
So
My parents spoke only Polish.
Only Polish. This is the reason why you speak so well. So good. So you see, it's very interesting to see the different kinds of group of Jews who came from Poland to Israel. And I think that the differences also, if you look at different writers, when they lived in Israel, when they came to Israel, when they left Israel, and there is a big difference between all those people. So it is really very interesting to see how it is represented in literature and in poetry. So
Yeah,
this is so important.
Leah,
When you came to Israel, on what year? Witold, when did you come?
92.
92. Wow, it's really late. Yes.
Leah, can I comment, please?
Yes, Gadi.
I think that the talk about the accepting the language is a bit different, because I believe that Israel is a country which combined people that came from all over the world, and everybody wants to stay with his own literature, with his own culture that he brought with him. I think that only the second and the third generation really get involved in the language of the new country. So it is not typical only to Polish what we are talking about, but it is typical to immigrants that arrive to a new country. And I think if you would look at Polish people that immigrated to New York or to the United States, you find that also they looked to be under shelter of people that came from the same country that they have been. And they felt that they will be free and they will be safe when they are surrounded with their own people and not just coming into a new country and being immediately with the language, with the same language. My mother arrived on 1935, and she came to a kibbutz. And there, before she arrived, she was in a kibbutz in Poland, in Ukraine, actually. It was Poland and Ukraine moving from one to the other. But in any case, when she came to the kibbutz, it was more easier to get involved because she was surrounded with maybe two girlfriends that arrived with her from Poland, but all the rest were Israelis, and they spoke Hebrew, and she was more easily accepted here because she was involved with local people. But I think that till she died, she had an accent of Polish. The accent, as far as we know, I mean, what I've investigated is, what I researched is connected to immigrant people that arrived here and changed the culture. It is known that after 10 years, while you are more than 10 years old, you cannot change anymore your accent. Your accent stays as it was till you have been 10 years old. And also the culture, I mean, all these people that arrive from other countries, they carry with them the culture, let's say, how to do the Pesach, how to do Shabbat, how to do all the, most of the habits they bring with them from their own country, and they stay with them till they are here. The most extreme one in our immigration groups is the German. All these people where they lived here, and most of them, many of them, didn't know Hebrew. They spoke only German. And so it's very, very typical. And I think we cannot generalize about Polish people otherwise.
You mean? Okay, thank you. I would like to mention Veronica's comment here. You can see she wrote about she was recommending on a new edition of the Chronicle of Pope Paul the Fourth, written by Benjamin Nehemiah ben Netanyahu in the 16th century. The translated chronic is part of the book by Dr. Martina Mampiri, Living Under the Evil Pope. The Hebrew Chronic of Pope Paul IV by Benjamin Netanyahu. Here we have the link. Thank you, Veronica, for mentioning it. This discussion is very important and very interesting. And I think you raised here, Professor Slawomir Jurek, you raised here a very important subject. And we are looking forward to read the English, your English translation, because I'm sure it will be a bestseller, your book, because really it represents the strong connections between the cultures and how they are affected one on each other. And this is a very important, and it gives us a very wider perspective on relationship between Jews and Poles. And this is also shows us how important is this forum. This forum is so important. The meetings between people from different levels in Israel, Poland, Germany, UK, we have here Mexico, and so we have United States. Rivka, yes, you are from the United States. So it's so important to discuss and to raise the awareness to this subject, and this is the way to build bridges. So if anyone has another question or comments, this is the time to do it, because time is running. When you enjoy, time is running, and we are closing an hour. So thank you again, Professor Żurek.
Thank you so much for your attention, and it was a privilege and honor to lead this lecture on this forum. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I remind you again, send proposals, because this will be our first book of this Poland Forum. It's important. We are pioneers, really pioneers in doing such special things and writing, and I'm looking forward also to meet you. Maybe in the near future we can meet face to face. So thank you. Stay safe, stay healthy, and good evening. Dobry wieczór.
Dobranoc.
Dobranoc. Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Kolorowych snów.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Dobranoc.
Bye.
Bye.
Do widzenia, bye bye.
Do widzenia.